This is fire? No, this is new video.
How do I find passion in my work? It felt like a never-ending cycle. I sat at my desk, staring at the same emails, the same spreadsheets, the same tasks I had been doing for what seemed like forever. No matter how much coffee I drank or how many motivational podcasts I listened to, something was missing. I wasn't just tired, I was uninspired. I didn't know what had happened. A year ago, this job was exciting, filled with opportunities and challenges. Now, it felt like I was stuck in a rut, going through the motions. How do I find passion in my work when it feels like my enthusiasm has disappeared? I couldn't help but reflect on how everything had started. When I first joined the company, I was eager. I was driven by the idea of making an impact, of proving myself. The work felt meaningful. I felt like I was part of something important. My role wasn't glamorous by any means, but I enjoyed the challenge of learning new things and working with my colleagues toward a common goal. But over time, the initial spark began to fade. I was no longer as excited to tackle new projects or brainstorm ideas. I was starting to resent the work that had once made me feel so fulfilled. It wasn't that I didn't want to succeed, I did. But the passion I once had seemed to have evaporated, and all that was left was a hollow routine. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. It wasn't just about getting through the day anymore. I wanted to reignite the fire I once had. I wanted to find passion in my work again. The question was, how? Reconnecting with the why. I knew I had to start by remembering why I'd chosen this path in the first place. Somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of my original motivations. I sat down one evening, away from the noise of the office and the constant notifications on my phone, and asked myself the most important question: why did I start this journey? I remembered that my goal wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder or getting a paycheck. I had entered this field because I genuinely believed I could contribute something valuable. I loved the idea of creating solutions, of solving problems, and of working with a team toward a shared vision. The why had always been about impact. But somewhere along the way, I had gotten caught up in the how, the endless tasks, the never-ending meetings, the demands from upper management, and I had lost touch with the heart of the work itself. I had stopped thinking about why I was doing this in the first place and started focusing solely on the mechanics of getting it done. To reignite my passion, I knew I needed to reconnect with the deeper purpose behind my work. I needed to remind myself that the things I was doing, no matter how mundane they seemed, were part of a bigger picture. I had to rediscover the impact my role had, not just on the company, but on the people we were serving. Once I embraced that mindset again, it felt like the fog lifted. I began to remember why I cared about what I did. I started to see the results of my work through a different lens. Whether it was helping a client solve a problem, ensuring the smooth operation of a project, or contributing to the success of my team, the work had meaning. And if it had meaning, then it deserved my passion. Changing my perspective. Once I remembered my why, I realized I also needed to change how I looked at the how. I was so focused on the end result, on the outcome, that I had stopped appreciating the process. I began to shift my perspective from seeing my work as a series of tasks to seeing it as a creative endeavor. No matter what I was doing, I reminded myself that every small step mattered. For example, instead of groaning about answering emails, I told myself that each email was an opportunity to connect with someone, to contribute to a project, to solve a problem. Instead of viewing routine meetings as time wasted, I began to see them as chances to collaborate and share ideas. Every part of my day, no matter how small, became an opportunity for growth and contribution. This mindset shift allowed me to find small moments of joy throughout the day. Rather than seeing the work as an obstacle, I began to see it as a series of chances to apply myself, to push my limits, and to improve. It wasn't about waiting for the perfect task to come along. It was about finding joy in the work I was already doing, seeking challenge and growth. Another step in rekindling my passion was recognizing the importance of challenge. Passion thrives when there's room to grow, when there's something to strive for. The work that no longer excited me had become routine because there were no challenges, no opportunities for learning or improvement. I decided to seek out new challenges within my role. This wasn't always easy, especially when the workload was heavy, but I found that pushing myself outside of my comfort zone brought back the excitement I had been missing. I volunteered for projects that allowed me to stretch my skills, took on tasks that seemed intimidating, and explored areas of the business I hadn't yet touched. By intentionally seeking growth opportunities, I reignited my curiosity. Every challenge, big or small, became an opportunity to learn something new. The process of stretching myself became fulfilling in itself, and the work started to feel more rewarding. Building stronger relationships at work. Passion is often contagious. One of the reasons I had fallen out of love with my job was the sense of isolation I felt. I was spending so much time focused on my individual tasks that I had neglected to build deeper relationships with my coworkers. It was easy to let my work feel disconnected from others when I wasn't forming meaningful connections. To change this, I started focusing more on collaboration. I made an effort to engage with my colleagues, to share ideas, to ask for feedback, and to celebrate our collective successes. By connecting with others, I realized that passion wasn't just about individual motivation. It was about the energy and enthusiasm of the people around me. Working in a team, collaborating with others, and learning from their experiences gave me a renewed sense of purpose. It was no longer just about me and my work. It was about us and our shared goals. We were all in it together, and that sense of community reinvigorated my passion for the job. Even as I started reconnecting with my why, shifting my perspective, and embracing new challenges, I realized that part of what was draining my passion was the way I measured success. For so long, I had let external factors define what achievement looked like: deadlines met, projects completed, performance reviews. But those things alone didn't make me feel fulfilled. I needed to redefine success on my own terms. Instead of focusing solely on external validation, I started asking myself, what would make my work meaningful to me? I realized that small victories mattered just as much as big ones. Success wasn't just about promotions or recognition from my boss. It was about the satisfaction of solving a problem, the impact I had on my colleagues, or the sense of growth I felt at the end of each day. When I shifted my focus from doing things for the sake of external success to finding personal fulfillment in my work, everything started to feel more worthwhile. For example, I used to dread routine administrative tasks because they felt monotonous. But when I reframed them as essential parts of making the bigger projects run smoothly, I started to see their value. I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment when I helped create an efficient process that made my team's work easier. Success wasn't always about major breakthroughs. It was also about the little contributions that added up over time. Injecting creativity into the work. Another key to reigniting my passion was infusing creativity into my daily tasks. Even though my job seemed straightforward, I realized there were always ways to approach it with more innovation and originality. Instead of completing assignments in the usual way, I started experimenting with how I could make them more engaging, both for myself and others. Could I introduce a new way of presenting reports? Could I improve a workflow that had become outdated? Could I brainstorm ideas that no one else had considered before? One day, during a routine project, I suggested a different approach, one that streamlined our workflow and saved everyone time. Seeing my idea come to life and benefit the team felt incredibly rewarding. That moment reminded me that passion isn't always about what you do, but how you do it. When I approached my work with creativity, I found new ways to stay engaged, even in tasks that had once felt mundane. Balancing passion with practicality. Even with all these changes, I had to be honest with myself. There were still parts of my job I didn't love, and that was okay. One of the biggest myths about passion is that we need to love every single part of what we do. The truth is, every job comes with challenges, tedious moments, and responsibilities that aren't particularly exciting. Instead of seeking perfection, I learned to focus on what mattered most. Was I growing? Was I making a difference? Did my work align with my values, at least in some way? I also started balancing my work with personal passions outside of my job. I realized that not all fulfillment had to come from my career. I could also find meaning in hobbies, relationships, and personal projects. I began writing again in my free time, something I had neglected for years. Surprisingly, that creative outlet made me more energized at work, too. Passion didn't have to come solely from my job. It could come from a life well-rounded with things that brought me joy, knowing when it's time for a bigger change. For a long time, I convinced myself that passion was something I just had to find in my existing job. And to an extent, that was true. I was able to rediscover excitement by shifting my mindset, embracing creativity, and reconnecting with my purpose. But I also had to acknowledge a difficult truth. Sometimes, passion is missing because the job simply isn't the right fit anymore. I had been so focused on making things work that I hadn't considered whether it was time to move on. The truth was, while I had found new ways to stay engaged, a part of me still felt like I wasn't fully aligned with my deeper goals. I had learned and grown, but something inside me knew I was meant for something more. That realization wasn't discouraging, it was empowering. My journey hadn't been a waste. In fact, it had been necessary. Through this process, I had learned what truly mattered to me in my work. I now understood what sparked my passion, what motivated me, and what drained me. With that knowledge, I could make a conscious decision about my next steps. So, I started exploring new opportunities, not from a place of desperation, but from a place of clarity. I wasn't running away from my current job. I was running towards something better. When the right opportunity finally came, a role that blended my skills with my deeper passions, I was ready. I wasn't afraid to take the leap because I had spent the time understanding what truly fulfilled me. Final reflection: passion is something you cultivate. Looking back, I realized that passion isn't something you just stumble upon. It's something you build. Sometimes, it's about shifting your perspective and finding meaning in what you already do. Other times, it's about recognizing when it's time to move on to something more fulfilling. Either way, passion isn't a magical feeling that appears out of nowhere. It's the result of being intentional, of seeking growth, creativity, and purpose in everything you do. And most importantly, passion isn't limited to just one thing. It's not about finding the one perfect job that makes you feel alive every second of the day. It's about creating a life where the things you do, inside and outside of work, align with who you are and what you care about. As I stepped into my new role, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: excitement, purpose, passion, and the best part? I knew that no matter where life took me, I now had the tools to keep finding and cultivating that passion wherever I went.